Right, so I think we can get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Ascend Together session today. On our agenda today, we'll have opening remarks, followed by a fireside chat led by Kristen and Elaine, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. We'll also have breakout rooms, so we'll all break out into different breakout groups to discuss 3 different topics that we've identified. And then we'll come back together, regroup and debrief from the sessions, but more importantly, just share some important action items and takeaways from the session. And then we'll turn to our closing remarks. So just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Mithika Khera, and I'm the co-VP of the Professional Programming Committee of the Ascend Greater Philadelphia chapter. And before we start, I wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this event, Kreisher Miller, for working alongside us in bringing this wonderful event to life. I'd also like to introduce our speakers for today's session. We have Elaine Chong, the president of Ascend's Greater Philadelphia chapter and a senior vice president at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And we have Kristen Seeger, director of talent acquisition at Kreisher Miller. And before we move on, I'd like to really thank all of our participants for joining. And especially, I know we have a few out-of-state participants, so welcome to the Greater Philadelphia chapter. So before I turn it to our speakers, I wanted to provide a quick overview about Ascend for those of you who are joining us for the first time. Ascend is the largest nonprofit pan-Asian membership organization for business professionals in North America. We're a career lifecycle organization giving members the opportunity to develop relationships with individuals at various stages of their careers, going from students all the way through board members. We have over 40 student chapters and 20 professional chapters located in the United States and Canada. And we offer robust professional development and career enhancement programs, which are really designed to cultivate pan-Asian talent. And over the years, we've also been working closely with several companies in the Greater Philadelphia chapter to bring awareness and to really develop our pan-Asian talent. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Maria Josh, who will walk through some of the logistics for our event today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to go over a few ground rules as we'll have breakout sessions later in this program. So just to keep the goal in mind, which is to have a safe and open forum and listen to different perspectives, definitely be open to hearing various viewpoints and understand how others are feeling. Have your mic on mute when you're not talking to allow the speaker to voice their thoughts. And of course, be comfortable in voicing your own opinion in the small breakout group sessions. And just a note, although the overall session is being recorded, the breakout rooms will not be recorded. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to Kristen to begin our fireside chat of the session.
Thanks, Maria. Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Seeger. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at Kreisher Miller. I've been with the firm for 14 years. Kreisher Miller is the largest independently owned public accounting firm in the Philadelphia area. Our services include audit, tax, and advisory, and we specifically work with privately held companies. We've been voted a top workplace 4 times by Philly.com, a firm to watch for 2021 by Accounting Today magazine, and we're known for our culture of kindness. So thank you all for joining us today. Kreisher Miller is honored to be a part of, to be a corporate sponsor of Ascend, and I'm honored to be interviewing Elaine Chong. Elaine serves as Ascend's Greater Philadelphia chapter president. She's a senior vice president of global commerce banking and has worked in the banking sector for over 30 years in client-facing roles. And she came to the US in 1998 and has been in the Philadelphia area since 2015. To those of you on the call today, my first introduction to Elaine and Ascend was at their 10th annual symposium held in 2018 at the Franklin Institute. I have never been so knocked out by a group's reception as I was with Ascend that evening. At this event, they had all of their board members lined up at the entrance, personally greeting each attendee. Talk about feeling overwhelmingly welcome. And not only that, I was also blown away at the caliber of the event and their dedication to elevating the members of the AAPI community. So that's a big part of why Kreisher Miller wanted to partner with Ascend and become a corporate sponsor. And I congratulate Ascend for taking the initiative on their 5-point action plan. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Elaine for a few minutes to talk about that plan and why we're here today.
Thank you, Kristen. So I wanted to take a moment before we get into the fireside chat to share with you why we're here today and what the 5-point action agenda is. And I think it would be really helpful for us to get a sense of the demographics of the attendees on the call today. I think it will really help maybe put in context our discussion, our ensuing discussion, for everybody's benefit, just to know where you are in your professional career life cycle. So if you wouldn't mind, we're going to run this poll very quickly, and you can select whether you're a student, a junior professional, middle professional, senior professional, or an executive to help us with this question. So wanted to share with you, some of the sentiments around this question. We have, people saying, look, they feel, very disempowered, a lot of political rhetoric, feeling racism, xenophobia, scapegoating. Also, you might have heard of the model minority myth and the negative impacts around that kind of a perception of the AAPI community, our overrepresentation, or at least the perceived overrepresentation of AAPI in the workforce and universities. And so these are all of the challenges we face as a community collectively it is a challenge, and we need to overcome some of these perceptions out there and very real anti-Asian hate sentiments going on in our community. So what Ascend has done is to come up with a 5-point action agenda. If you would please go to the next slide, Maria. The 5-point action agenda was launched by Ascend National along with 9 other leading organizations who are engaged in the championship for diverse communities like Catalyst, Alpha, NABA, Out and Equal, to name a few. And they launched the 5-point action agenda, which has been signed on by 150 plus corporations and still growing. The effort has led us to redouble our mission in promoting inclusion and to stand together in solidarity to address the adverse impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not a surprise to you that the coronavirus outbreak has claimed a disproportionate numbers of lives in communities of color and has given rise to a surge of anti-Asian sentiment. So the initiative is a call to action on our members, our partners, associates to join along with the growing list of supporting companies in affirming the following 5-point action agenda you see here. And one is to promote inclusion, advocating for the diverse and inclusive workforce in society, raise awareness, highlighting the unique aspects of the pandemic on vulnerable groups, denouncing bias, supporting our communities, contributing time, knowledge, and other resources to aid frontline workers, victims and families, and providing financial support and resources to help vulnerable people and those who are impacted by the virus. So those are the reasons why we're here today, to engage in this discourse, building awareness and promoting inclusion amongst our members and our allies. So thank you so much for being here. We hope that the session will increase your knowledge and your fluency on the subject so that we are better equipped to address anti-Asian bias, whether these are outright offensive, discriminatory acts, or acts stemming from unconscious biases. As a human being, I would prefer to think that these are more unconscious biases than racist acts. So let's take a look at some data to support this very quickly. We'll just run through these next few slides. So the next slide shows, one stat that really jumps out at me when I look at this is the circle on your right. Look at the biases that's occurring at workplaces. 35%, that was an eye-opener for me. so it's everywhere, and you have to be educated to be able to address, these types of experiences. And let's go to the next slide. And this is another data point around hate crimes. No surprises here. I'm sure you've seen this in the press everywhere. Even the overall hate crimes have reduced by 7%. The anti-Asian violence, physical and verbal, has gone up by 149%. So we'll get a chance to talk about this in the breakout groups, and why is this number, what comprises this number, and people experiences of these type of events in their personal lives. Next slide, please. And I wanted to show you this slide because the Ascent Foundation has done some really tremendously good work to illuminate the subject. They've put out some fantastic publication based on our own research. And you can find these published in the ascendleadership.org archive website, and is available for you at no cost. You can just go in there and download the information. There's a paper that just came out on the Asian minority myth, and our past papers include Illusion of Asian Success, and a number of other works. So I hope you take an opportunity to look at those. So then let's, that's the end of the formal part, and I'm going to turn this back to Kristen to kick off the fireside chat. I'm very much looking forward to sharing my story with you. And if you're looking around for somebody else to be the solution, then you're maybe in the wrong place today. We are part of an integral part of the solutioning. It takes courage, it takes motivation. I really want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. So back to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Elaine. And again, thank you so much for being with us here today. I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to get to know you so well over the past couple of years. And for everyone on the call today that hasn't met Elaine or been to an Ascend event, you're in for a real treat. And in full disclosure, I do tend to get nervous when talking in a public forum, let alone about race relations. But my goal here is to foster an environment where everyone is comfortable speaking openly about this topic. So if there's anything that I say that could be interpreted a different way, please excuse me in advance. Like many of us, I'm still learning in this journey. So Elaine, you ready to get started?
Yes, ready to roll.
All right. Well, why don't you start off by telling us about your experience growing up in Malaysia, which is very multicultural. When did you become aware of the issue of race, and how did that impact you?
Yes, so the majority population in Malaysia is made up of the indigenous Malays, for those of you who are familiar with Southeast Asia and Malaysia, and the minorities are the Chinese and the South Indians, and they've just migrated over to Malaysia over the years for economic reasons. As kids, we were blind, honestly, completely blind to the color of our skins. My best friend was a South Indian girl. And it wasn't until I was late in my teens that I understood the impact of affirmative action, which was widely applied. It was introduced during my generation to address racial, social, and economic inequality between the three major ethnic groups. And as the majority wealth owners in the economy, the Chinese were the most adversely impacted. So for example, public universities admission, that was a quota system. And it resulted in driving me to pursue my college education overseas in Australia. Opportunities to establish private ownership in business enterprises, access to funding were all constrained based on the central government affirmative action policy. And I saw my father's business suffered from the impact of these policy actions. So I believe I lived through what we would call systemic racism, in looking back.
Wow, I would say my background is quite the opposite. My first 25 years were pretty homogeneous. I grew up in a white, predominantly Catholic environment with very little interaction with other ethnicities. I mean, maybe we had a handful of underrepresented students in our entire school. And then I went to Villanova for college, which back in the late 80s, early 90s, people called it Vanilla Nova. And then I went to work in public accounting, which at the time was pretty exclusively run by white males. So it really wasn't until I was in college that my friends included someone that wasn't white, and probably not until my professional life that my inner circle really included people with backgrounds and experiences that were much different from mine. So I'm very envious that you grew up with such incredible exposure to different cultures. You've lived in quite a number of countries for purposes of pursuing higher education and work opportunities. I'm curious how you found yourself fitting into the many different cultures. How did you identify yourself? Did you see yourself as being from a minority race? How do you think others saw you?
Indeed, indeed. I'm very fortunate, Kristen, to have had the opportunity to travel and experience many different cultures throughout my career. I never saw myself as a minority. In that regard, I feel I'm very lucky. I had great mentors, bosses who truly believed in me and pulled me up. I don't think my skin color mattered to them one bit. All my bosses were white. They were more interested in promoting me because of my skills, my proven job performance, and my capacity to adapt and learn. In fact, my brain does this thing I think people call code switching. I can pick up accents quickly and learn to speak with a British accent, Australian accent, Singlish in Singapore, American. And I think it's this innate need to belong to the mainstream. As for my mentors and all those people who took a risk on me, I guess these days, you would call them allies. I believe in meritocracy, and this is that push part of the push-pull equation. I want to say you have to, acquire the necessary skills, perform at 110%, have a differentiated contribution to bring to your job. Some may call this diversity of thought. All this is to say, be comfortable in your own skin. You don't have to be in the mainstream. What I've come to realize over the years is that the more you learn about others, the more you learn about yourself. Adopt behaviors and disciplines that make you better, stronger, and discard the parts that make you weak, and kind of just keep moving forward, keep growing, keep learning.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the more you learn about others, the more you learn about yourself. I can now recognize that my personal values only developed once I was kind of on my own in the world. Having grown up in such a homogeneous environment, I think for me, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's where some of the fear comes from, right? Fear of speaking up, saying the wrong thing. But when we're afraid to have a conversation, we don't learn and grow. And after being exposed to different people and different cultures, I now find my relationships to be much richer, much deeper, and my experiences to be more meaningful. And you have this great adaptability from your experience, whereas for me, that came much later in life. I feel like I'm still learning and growing in that area, and that's why DEI is an ever-evolving process. The thing about being an ally is it's not about you, right? Which leads to my next question. So at what point in time did you make this shift in your self-identity from being blind to color, if you will, to being the advocate that you are today?
When I came to Philadelphia 6 years ago, it was just a very selfish thing to think about it this way. And I thought the quickest way to network and build my personal brand was to join a board. I mean, that was it. At the time, Ascend Greater Philadelphia was looking for a president, and I was offered the role. Was very honored. It sounded interesting, but I had no idea what I was signing up for. No idea about advocacy. I've never done that kind of work in my entire life. Barely heard about D&I, embarrassingly. Remember, I never identified as a minority. So, this was a brand new gig for me. And I really did my best, in fact, to do the opposite, to stay in the mainstream. So as I educated myself about the racial and economic inequalities and social justice issues facing people of AAPI heritage, the passion around the work grew. It just grew. And I think my experience of the systemic racism I experienced growing up might have something to do with it. So, so this is what I call myself, an accidental advocate. As an adult immigrant, I had to go back to taking US history lessons and learn about the history of Asian Americans, the civil rights movement, you know, the US Constitution, which is an incredible documentation, a document, which is, you know, I think the envy of people all over the world. And the whole idea is so that I can develop this 360-degree perspective of how we as Asian Americans got here to this point. You know, why we're having this conversation. While I believe in meritocracy, you know, I also understand numbers and data don't lie. So in the research by the Ascend Foundation, Asians are 27% of the STEM workforce, but only 14% of executives. Asian men are 19% of the workforce and 11% of executives. Asian women, unfortunately, we fare the worst, are 7.9% of the workforce, and we make up 3% of executives.
Wow. It's interesting that you call yourself an accidental advocate. I like that. I think it was in my journey of finding my passion, which is to help and connect others, that my eyes were open. I've developed strong friendships with others that have had very different experiences in everyday life and in the workforce than I've had. And I think that I became an ally once I realized that my reality may not be someone else's reality. You know, I was always raised to include others. If you had a birthday party, you invited everyone in the whole class. So when I see these disparities, there's something in me that gets fired up. And in my role at Kreisher Miller, as head of talent acquisition, as chair of our DEI council, I've had an opportunity to use this platform to be the voice for others and help them succeed. In interview discussions, I can point out that a student has had to work through college to pay for their own education, or I can bring up the name of a colleague in a conversation and suggest certain people be nominated for roles that will help them advance. So I feel like I can be an ally by bringing attention to the matter and like sponsoring today's event, not only to increase awareness, but to get people talking to each other. So I like that term. Any final thoughts or comments, Elaine, before we move into the breakout groups?
Yes, you know, I have to say I'm very proud of what our chapter has been able to accomplish, how effective our platform has been to help amplify our collective voices. But here I am, right, an accidental advocate. Never underestimate the power of one. One person can change the world. So for me, it's also about paying it forward. I happened upon my mission. I count my lucky stars, and in the process, I found my voice. I have the privilege of a platform. I have a wonderful husband and 2 daughters who inspire me all the time, call me out all the time as well, and a supportive employer and terrific colleagues. Some of them are here today to cheer me on. So I really feel a strong sense of obligation to help others find their voice. Maybe in closing, I want to share a quote from Grace Lee Boggs. She is an Asian American community activist. When I first read this, I said, that's me. This quote in a nutshell tells my story. So here it is. You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. So that's me.
I love it. Thank you so much. Mithika, I'm going to turn it back to you to kick off the breakout groups.
Thank you, Kristen and Elaine. That was a really wonderful fireside chat, and just to take the conversation deeper and to hear everyone's, candid thoughts on some of these topics. We're going to jump into breakout groups. We're going to have 6 breakout groups today, and we're going to spend about 20 minutes in the breakout groups discussing, issues, what our own personal experiences are, and then we'll come back to the bigger group and, share our action points and what we want to do and take away from today's session. So with that, Maria, if you can split us up into our groups. All right, so maybe we can start with group 1, sharing what was discussed in your breakout group, maybe just a couple of minutes sharing action items of what we can do to bring about change in our organizations based on the discussion.
So we had a really great conversation, and I think several of our group participants brought up some really good ideas, but the central theme was education. And one of the things that Alassane shared, he recently read a book called High Conflict, which has something called conflict theory, which is the idea that when you spend more time with people who are different than you, whether they look different, have a different background, whatever that may be, you ultimately tend to discover that you have more in common than you thought. And it's an opportunity to, of course, learn more about somebody else's background and where they're coming from. But it sort of takes away that, maybe any lingering us versus them mentality where you feel like you can recognize that you have some common ground. So really the only way to get there is by challenging yourself to connect with other people, to attend educational events like this one. And one of the ideas that was shared is, we were joking about it in our session, but especially in the accounting profession, you tend to have a lot of people who are a little bit more introverted. So maybe they aren't always comfortable just reaching out to somebody, especially if it's somebody that they don't know. So maybe there's something that companies could do to help facilitate that a little bit. Maybe, some shared meetings or get-togethers, just sort of get people together. So it takes away that stress and anxiety of being the person to do the reach out. And that sort of paves the way for having some of those learning conversations.
Thank you. Those were some great ideas. I think that we can all take back with us as we kind of, walk away from this session and maybe spend some time over the weekend thinking about what was discussed. So thank you for sharing that. Would group 2 like to share?
Hi. For group 2, we also had a good discussion on various items, including the education as well as the model minority myth and what it's all about and what steps can be taken to basically overcome that myth. I think one of the most important ones which we talked about is being an advocate for self and also bring allies into the mix. And the idea is that as a Asian, we have a fear for failure, and then overcome that fear, and then also be ready to speak out for yourself. And you are the best advocate for promoting yourself, and reach out to others and then talk and say what you can do and what you would like to do. So that's the whole idea of overcoming the bamboo ceiling, which you can hit in your career. So that's one of the major points we discussed. And we also did talk about education and how joining in different courses within your organization and also different professional organizations to help out in your career growth.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think as Asians, we always struggle with self-advocacy, but it's more important, for us to learn how to advocate for ourselves and really have the support from our colleagues. So with that, maybe we can turn to group 3. I was actually facilitating the discussion in group 3, so I can provide a quick update on our discussion. It was actually a really great conversation. And a few of the key points that came up, Melanie, similar to your group, we also discussed the importance of education and making sure that not only do we learn about our own minority community, but also others, so that in times when, there is something going on in society or in our communities, we can really be supportive and be there for our colleagues and friends. And so one of the things that we also discussed was really like reaching out and making sure that we're checking in on different people, because we never know how someone is dealing with what's going on in our society, or, you know, back in their own home countries. We never know. And so it's really important to be allies and to make sure that we reach out and we check in periodically, so that everybody knows that we're there to support each other in difficult times. And so when they have a question or they have something they're struggling with, they feel comfortable to open up and talk to you about it. And then another thing that we discussed was really being intentional in, you know, when we're doing recruitment within organizations. So one, really thinking about like what perception others have when they see, you know, recruitment material that has all, you know, white male professionals on it, and really being mindful of that. But then also, when we go through the interview process, making sure that we have diverse professionals participating in the process, so that the candidate sees that the company fosters diversity. Because oftentimes companies do foster diversity, but it doesn't come across when we go through an interview process. So just being intentional and mindful about things like that was another one that came up in our group. So with that, maybe I'll turn to group 4 for their debrief.
I think that's me. Is that me? Many common threads that have already been shared. The concept of awareness and the concept of being an ally were a lot of what we talked about. One interesting takeaway was an awareness in particular of both checking our own biases, right? And whether you're in a majority or in an underrepresented group, checking our own biases and how that's an ongoing process. And it's something that we have to confront constantly. What assumptions are we making when we see a name? You know, when we just physically see somebody, and checking those, and how important it is to realize that we all have them, and you have to acknowledge the fact that we all have them. And how important it is to get to know the individual, which kind of spoke to what Melanie was sharing that Alison had spoken about. And that dovetails into another theme, which was that concept of the monolithic experience, right? And, you know, the Asian cultures in particular, there are many, many Asian cultures, and with very different points of view, with very different experiences, with very different histories. Kelly talked about a friend who, you know, is of Chinese descent, and, you know, China is a very large country. And we sort of, you know, we talked about how even here in Philadelphia, God forbid, where you say that somebody's from a different neighborhood, you take offense to it, let alone assuming that a country as large as China or any other country is some sort of monolithic experience. And then Christian went on to share what I think is a really courageous but a really important takeaway, and that is the importance of also speaking up with friends and family who may be of different generations, who may be of different points of view, and making sure that they know that certain terms, Steve, you know, we talked about like just using terms like, you know, like opening the kimono. We talked about terms like master bedroom that you just use and you don't even think about. But as we become aware of them, how important it is that when you are surrounded by friends and family who maybe aren't aware of that, or maybe are of a different generation where they think certain phrasing is okay or certain points of view are okay, to challenge them on that and explain to them why that's no longer acceptable, and be courageous in doing that. So, you know, I think that's a real ally move that Christian, you know, mentioned, and a real takeaway I know that I'll take with me personally.
Thank you for sharing that. I definitely agree with that. I've had many such experiences, you know, in my time in the US. So maybe we turn to group 5 to quickly debrief. I know we do want to move on to the next item on the agenda.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I wanted to really quickly to introduce Trevor, because I was moderating group 5 and we had a really great discussion about the model minority myth. And the question was, is the model minority hurtful or helpful for AAPIs? And we were trying to have a very open discussion, but we saw that this myth would have you believe that Asian Americans, all Asian Americans are successful, hardworking, et cetera, but sometimes that boxes them into these stereotypes, set of expectations that are sometimes unrealistic to fulfill, but at the same time, there's a double-edged sword because, there's, all these, with all these expectations, you would think the myth would have you believe that we're successful as a group, but the numbers show that there is a bamboo ceiling. So anyway, I wanted Trevor to share his perspective because I thought he had a really great insight. So over to you, Trevor.
Thank you. All right, and just because we did say we're going to keep it brief, I will try to keep this brief. More or less, when I finally got to weigh in, it was kind of difficult for me to share a great perspective from the workplace, because we wanted to tackle it from personal, society, politically, and then from a workplace perspective as well. And how is there systemically a ceiling for certain minority groups to be kind of blocked into a role, and that's where you're going to stay. It's just you're constantly just going to be pushing out and manufacturing just crazy levels of effort, but with not necessarily the same look that everybody else would get. And personally, again, being a part of Kreisher Miller, I'm new, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't make a difference. And in that instance, when you're new, lots of times you tend to have blinders on and you're really just worried about staying in your own lane, is how I put it in our breakout session. And that can be detrimental to your fellow worker. And our initiatives at Kreisher Miller have been setting the tone from the bottom. It's a top down, it's obviously a tone to top approach, but also that it has to start with one of our generations, and just really making sure that we keep the ball moving. So it's something that I would want to be more cognizant about in my own personal dealings. And then being from Northeast Philadelphia, I also shared that I was from a cultural melting pot. Great food, great culture, great everything in this area in terms of what you could possibly run into in your daily. And that any of my hindrances that I developed were kind of a development of expectations set on by my parents. And it kind of put that all in perspective when the example came up of allocating resources between children and having a favorite child, and one child feeling neglected, or that the expectations placed on them are unreasonable. And that was all just key things that really nailed it for me, at least, just to understand that perspective. But I know that a lot of things that we also talked about, again, it's that identifying that belonging, that lack of mentorship. Is it all there? Do you feel that you speaking up for yourself and being your own advocate is enough? Do you have someone else that can have your back? Those were all just really key points that we had in our breakout session. So I hope I did everybody else justice on that one. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Trevor. And we'll turn it to the last group. Urvi, if you want to do a quick debrief.
Yes, so we ran out of time, but again, one of the things we talked about more was in terms of, the future, how the recent events have really changed, our thinking and our discussion. And I think the key kind of, thought was, and the opinion was that, while there's a lot of discussion going on, which is great, that, people are talking about everything in terms of how we view others' perspectives, others' viewpoints, but there's a lot of change that needs to occur, and a lot of actions need to take place, which could really range from kind of reaching out to your congressman, or including being more inclusive of people in your teams. So again, a lot of kind of discussion on well, we do need to take a lot of action, but the discussion and the dialogue that's happening right now is a great starting point.
Great, thank you, Urvi, and thank you everyone for participating in those discussions. It seems like everyone had great breakout group discussions. So with that, maybe we'll turn to a quick word cloud activity. All right. So you can see the link here, and we'll paste it into the chat as well. But if you can just click on that, and we're just going to quickly do an activity where, we would like everyone to maybe describe in one word your feeling after the engagement with the, with the community today, and as compared with how you were feeling when we started out this morning. And so maybe if everyone can quickly go in either to the link or just text Maria Josh 223 to 22333. With your response. All right. So we're seeing the responses come through. We see empowered. We see educated seems like, the key one that's coming up. Inspired, which is great. Hopeful. Encouraged. I see informed as well. I see informed, well-informed. So it seems like everyone's, had a good session today, but also really has some takeaways from it. I see educated being like the big one. So it seems like everyone's learned something from today's session and is feeling empowered to make a change and feeling hope that we're going to see that change come through. So that's very exciting. Thank you so much again, everyone, for sharing. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Pei, who's the acting executive director of our national board for Ascend, to just, close this out and bring it all together for us.
Thank you. And really appreciate the Philly chapter and Kreisher Miller for inviting me to give quick closing remarks. I'll promise to keep it short. Really was happy to be part of this and honored to come here and just kind of help wrap it up. I thought for me, it was really important to hear some of these personal stories, and the key topic, there were a lot of great learnings, but for me was how to become a better ally. When I heard Elaine and Kristen talk about the more you learn about others, the more you learn about yourself. It's so true. As we kind of learn about others and what they've experienced through that lens, you really learn about your own biases and your own kind of microaggressions and how to kind of address that. And I also think by learning about others, your own experiences become more meaningful and relationships become deeper and richer, which I totally agree. And those are two things that really resonated well with me during that fireside chat. My breakout session was terrific. People shared personal stories, and I don't have to iterate again what Group 4 did, but I really thought all of the breakout rooms had some really deep conversations and lessons we could learn from. Last but not least, I wanted to share with you a little bit about Ascend. Ascend has done a lot of work around Ascend Together. This is one of many type of programs that we've done. We call this engagement, meaning we want to engage with our members, with our sponsors, with our partners of Ascend, and we want to continue to spread the word. In addition to this, we have advancement type of activities. For example, recently we talked about the 10 by 25 initiative, where our goal by 2025 is to have 10% of Fortune, 500 boards be enriched with, Asian corporate directors. We also have programs to change our own sentiment. We know we all have biases, so we talk about Black and Asian solidarity as one of the programs that we're developing and launching. We talked a lot about the model minority myth and the recent research paper that, we're really happy to have Nan here, who's one of the authors of that paper. And we'll have more research and papers for all of you to use within your own, for individually as well as in your companies. And finally, we're embarking on storytelling, because we do believe that as part of these programs, it's really important to share your own personal stories, right, to others, including people at your workplace, and really host these type of discussions among yourselves as well within your companies and within your network. So thank you again for attending this, and I look forward to having you attend another future session around Ascend Together and some of the other programs that Ascend does. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this wonderful, enlightening session, like everyone pointed out. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it to Sush to just provide an update on the upcoming events. Maybe Sush is having some technical difficulties, so I can just quickly close us out. So we have a couple of exciting events upcoming in the next few months. So in the month of July, we have an event that we're working on with Accenture, which should be coming up soon. And then in August, we have the National Convention, the Ascend National Convention, followed by in September, we're also planning another event which will be sponsored by DuPont. So please stay tuned for additional information and please join us if you can. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.